Hi everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's lovely to be back with you again. Don't know me, my name's Gladstone. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I am a schema coach and therapist, and nowadays I work primarily with people really looking to have better relationships, and I'm all about the big P word, which is prevention. Look, most people who are out there aren't evil. That's not what I'm saying. We all have these sides to us, but so many of us get involved in relationships that are just not good for us. And over the years, I've had so many women, in particular, also men, but primarily women, come along painting this particular pattern. The pattern is an old familiar pattern, old familiar story. It goes like this. It's really hard to find a good partner. I keep meeting people who I get involved with, but then over time they become more and more narcissistic, or that side rears up when it's being triggered in different ways, and they've lost themselves in the relationship. They've suffered narcissistic abuse or some degree of control and ongoing control and criticism, or they've been with partners who have just been very distant and very difficult to engage. It hasn't been overtly negative, it just hasn't been particularly good. And because of their own schemas, they've stayed in these relationships, and it's been really hard to get out early. And the other person, the other side of the coin, they've got their own schemas too. They've got their own struggles too. But everybody should be looking at who they are. We all should be looking at who we are in relationships. It's not one person's good, one person's evil. I guess there are some cases where we could say that potentially, but most of the time we're just human beings trying to do our best, and we are caught up with our own stories in life. We're caught up with our own scripts. We're caught up with intergenerational trauma. We're caught up with old stories that we've learned. Our schemas, which are our core beliefs that govern the decisions we make in life, and particularly in romantic relationships. It is no coincidence who we're attracted to. We are attracted to people based on our blueprint, based on our emotional blueprint, what I call our love template, right? And I am pretty passionate about helping people change that love template and figure out who we are first, so that if we have this pattern, if we look back and say, honestly, I can say I've got a pattern of ending up with narcissistic people, or ending up with people who have been always critical or controlling, or ending up with emotionally depriving people, and I want something different for myself, then you actually have to change the programming. You can't just go, I'm going to hope for the best. You have to actively change the programming. You need to do that. And today that's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about that through an example, and I'm going to tell you about a woman who I've known her for about a year or so, and I'm going to change her name, and it's all good that I can share her with you. That's all good consent-wise. I've disguised it a bit anyway, but she's very happy for me to share her story, and I'm going to call her Sophie. Now, Sophie's story, I'm sharing this with you because I want you to see that there is hope. I want you to see that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel, okay? Because so many people I have worked with have come in and they've sought out help, but they've come from a very despondent, if not just hopeless place, where they've said, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to find a nice partner. I just want a partner where we can have a nice life, where we can perhaps have a family, where we can get on most of the time, where this person is good enough and I'm good enough for them, where we have a emotionally compatible connection. And people are giving up on that. And I think that before you give up on that, you need a closer self-analysis. Now, this is not about improving yourself to the point of rewriting your whole personality. It's not about saying you're not good enough and you've got to make yourself more desirable for a partner. We don't want to go down that path. But if I could just give people the biggest bit of encouragement and hope for the future, I would say this, particularly for women who are worried about, I'm going to run out of time. Obviously for women, there are biological imperatives, and women are worried about, they want to have a family or they want to have a child. They'd like to have that with a partner. They'd like to have that sort of family and a traditional family, and they want to have a child with a partner, and they become very worried about whether that's going to happen. And that, in conjunction with a million other things, blocks their view. And so many women are making decisions out of fear, and I get it because I have been there by myself in the past, have made decisions out of fear rather than making decisions from really the point of really going inward and trusting themselves and saying, does this feel right? You know what? It doesn't feel right. It's not because I'm being nitpicky or pedantic. There is actually very little match here in the sense of emotional compatibility. I'm being dismissed in this relationship, or this person actually really isn't even curious about me on a deeper level, that I want to get to know me, or maybe they've got a lot of stuff in their life that affects their ability to relate in a healthy way. These women will have these gut feelings that this relationship isn't right for me, but there will be a number of things that come up that stop them making a good decision. And some of the time that very good decision is to just call it quits and leave and be better prepared for the next potential opportunity that comes along, rather than staying in the relationship. And one of the things that keeps them staying in the relationship is their thoughts around, maybe this is as good as it's going to get, maybe I won't meet anybody else, maybe I should just see if it gets better. But believe me, if you're making the decisions based on that, one day you're going to most likely regret it, but your world will become so much more complicated because you will have those couple of kids that you will have to figure out what's going to go on with that. And that makes your life so much more complicated than it could be. So it's not to say that you can't improve things after you have children and build a new life for yourself. A lot of people do that, and they do that very well, and they do that very bravely. But I'm just letting you know that there are always opportunities. So please don't make decisions out of fear, for fear that this is it for you. We live in a very different time nowadays. We live in a much more tolerant community. We live in the age of medical and technological advances. You can do almost anything. All right. So don't be blocked by this idea of, this is going to be as good as I get. There's nothing much else out there for me. No one else is going to want me anyway. This is all your schemas speaking. Okay. Don't make big life decisions based out of fear and desperation, because if you do, that will mainly come back to bite you later on. I'm speaking to these women who are in this space now, trying to figure out what to do. They're scared. They're feeling like, oh my God, there's nothing out there for me. I keep having this pattern, or maybe this ex-boyfriend who, says he's changed for the 7th time. Maybe I should give him another go. I just want to share Sophie's story with you to give you a little bit of hope. Okay, so here we go. Let me just give you a tiny bit of background first, because I know the detail is in the background. It's always good to have that information. Sophie is a 37-year-old woman who I met a little over a year ago now, but we did our work within from first meeting her to the point where she's actually in a relationship that looks like it's quite positive, was about a year. So Sophie's 37. She came to see me after years of repeating this painful relationship pattern. And the pattern was that she would get into relationships that were pretty volatile, that were not emotionally compatible or supportive. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. Just give you a little bit of background of her. So, her history, her background is not unusual. In her early childhood, Sophie did experience what you might call emotional instability, right? And you might call it some degree of attachment trauma. Not really what we would identify or what the person in the community would identify as overt abuse or neglect, certainly, but subtle disruptions in emotional connection. Subtle and sometimes not so subtle. And her parents divorced when Sophie was 11. But before that, the home environment was marked by this kind of inconsistency. Her father, who was loving, he was very loving at times and quite charming, did have a sharp cutting edge when he was in a bad mood. So when someone tells me that, I hear something very important. And what I'm hearing is that for one of their primary attachment figures, they had a big dose of what's called the good-bad ratio. It goes straight back to object relations theory, and it means that we're in a predicament. She had a father who had these lovely sides. He was loving and affectionate at times, very charming, but he also had a side where if he wasn't in a good mood, he would turn. He had a cutting edge to him. He would say verbally hurtful things. So he could be verbally critical and moody, and Sophie often felt like collateral damage during his emotional swings in the house. Now, her mother was warm and affectionate. She described her as being like a typical mother in this regard. So she was warm and she was affectionate, but she also described her as being distracted, managing a very busy life, dealing with the moods of the father, raising two younger siblings. And so Sophie learnt to be the good girl. There wasn't a lot of emotional space in the home left over there. She became and her temperament was somewhat sensitive, so she became very helpful and compliant, rarely expressing her needs, rarely making a fuss. She didn't want to be a burden. I guess she could see that mum was often having a hard time and didn't want to be a burden. One of the striking things about her is that she would say that she felt she didn't get enough good stuff with her parents. So she would always be wanting for more. Like mum would be there, it would be nice, then she'd be gone. What's going on here? So she'd be left wanting. This was the vibe. So her upbringing left her with a quiet but persistent sense of, I guess the schema I'm going to say, emotional deprivation, right? She felt responsible for other people's feelings and struggled to voice her own needs. So here are her schemas, all right? So I'm going to tell you what her schemas are. 1, she has an abandonment schema. 2, there is an emotional deprivation schema. 3, there is some level of defectiveness and shame, mild to moderate, you might say. 4, there is a subjugation schema, and 5, there was an approval-seeking schema. Okay, so they're her main kind of, you could say also other directed self-sacrifice was in there as well. Now, this is a super common schema picture. This is a really common schema picture for women like Sophie, okay? Abandonment, emotional deprivation, some degree of shame and defectiveness, and then these other directed schemas. Whether it's primarily subjugation, which it was in her case because of the dominant father with the cutting sharp tongue who could flip into different modes. There was fear, sometimes fear in the house. And so she developed a subjugation, but she was also a bit self-sacrificing, a bit of an approval seeker as well. So she often would internalize this conflict she heard with the parents. She learned to keep the peace. She was a bit of a peacekeeper rather than speak up. And there was certainly no advocating for herself. She wasn't told how to do, she wasn't educated about how to advocate for herself. And through these moments, although there were moments of lightness and joy, deep down she always craved for, like I said, more closeness and more attunement. Okay. So that's Sophie's background. Not uncommon. We're seeing the good-bad ratio. In other words, a primary attachment figure, in this case, the dad, was both good. He could be loving, he could be warm, he could be charming, fun. And he also had a noxious side. He could really get quite vitriolic and he had a nasty tongue. So that's Sophie's background. Now let me tell you about her relationship history. So let's look at some of the patterns in her relationship history. When I met Sophie, she had recently come out of a 7-year relationship with a partner that she'd described as self-absorbed and emotionally unavailable. The relationship at times was volatile, marked by deep schema chemistry. So there was a lot of attraction to this person. They had a relationship for 7 years. She struggled to leave and only ended it at the very end of a protracted 7-year relationship after he had cheated on her. And even then it took several attempts. So she was well and truly entrenched in this relationship and found it very difficult to leave. So prior to this 7-year relationship, there was a series of emotionally distant or somewhat narcissistic partners. One had a drinking problem, another strung her along in a 2-year sort of situationship. Others treated her like a convenience, never fully committing, breadcrumbing enough just to keep her engaged. So we've got a pattern there. She felt unseen, yet at times deeply attached to these people. She couldn't understand why she was drawn to men who didn't really treat her very well, or why she kept ignoring the red flags she could clearly see in hindsight. So it's really interesting when I talk to women like Sophie, because like I say, it's not that women don't see red flags. Women are very good at perception. They can see red flags, they can notice things are not right. What they're not so good at is trusting themselves and taking these indicators, these signs, seriously. And so they will second guess themselves. They will say, oh, he's just got a busy job, but he comes from a really dysfunctional family, or maybe I'm just being too sensitive, or maybe it'll get better if I just be a better partner, he'll grow, etc., etc. This is rarely the case. What you see is what you get. The person in front of you is the person. They're not your project. If they're sitting in front of you, this is what you've got. Of course, there could be exceptions to that. If you get a real sense that people are very emotionally open, they're responsible for themselves, and they take ownership of their issues, then people can change. But if they haven't arrived at that place yet, they're probably not going to change. In hindsight, she could see that there were many things she should have taken notice of, but she discounted them because of her schemas, basically, and other issues she had going on and other fears in her life. Interestingly, Sophie also had a very strong belief in having a type. She thought she had a type. Now, this is a really common issue. Now, her type, she thought, was charismatic, funny, confident men who had a mysterious edge. But this type was really grounded in her early experiences and her love template, shaped by this sort of inconsistent affection that she received in her early years, shaped by the kind of lack of protection and having to work for love. We reframed this in coaching together, that your type is often a trauma echo. It's not the truth. So working with Sophie, she was able to see that this concept of a type, having a type that you're attracted to and that being a good thing, is quite a furphy. And we reframed this, and she realized that, yeah, she does have a type, but that's not something she should take seriously or believe that is truth. And it is very true that your type is often a trauma echo, not a truth. So let's look at the journey over the 12 months. What did we do? So first of all, if you're like Sophie and you're wanting to change your trajectory, you have to do a few certain things, and you have to make a real commitment to yourself as well. So over the course of our work together, Sophie experienced several key shifts. Now, The very first thing to do is that we need to conduct a relational review and build awareness. So we conducted a full review of her relationship history, where we identified themes, commonalities, red flags, emotional flashpoints, coping modes. She began to see how her abandonment and emotional deprivation schemas were shaping her attraction and making it very hard to leave situations that weren't good. So that first part there, the relational review, or the relationship review if you like, is where you sit down and in all honesty record every relationship that you've been in. You write it down, even perhaps if it's only been a fling. What you'll often find is sometimes the first relationship that you have is very different from the rest of your relationships. But you will notice that if you have a pattern that you're trying to break, you will see the pattern there. You will see that you will find emotional availability in one way or another skewed to one side. And in Sophie's case, that was skewed to being emotionally unavailable partners with a narcissistic, self-absorbed edge. Some of the guys could be quite critical, and some of them were just not giving enough. They were distant. They were emotionally unavailable. We looked at that, and that's the very first thing that you need to do to take stock. And there are other things you can do with that, but that's just giving you just a general overview. That's the kind of first thing I'll do with clients who want help from me about their relationships and to change their pattern. We can't move forward until we know where we've been, right? So we have to have a look at where we've come from. Now, sometimes this is really difficult because you think, I can't see a pattern. What are you talking about? But you will see patterns emerge, and sometimes you need another person to sit with you so we can have a look at those. We look at those patterns. We're also interested in, it's not just what colour hair did they have and how tall they were, it's how do they make you feel? What was the dynamic in the relationship? Did you feel seen? What themes came up for you in the relationship? What did you feel about yourself? What was the emotional quality like? Were there any repetitive dances in the relationship and cycles in the relationship? And then what were the characteristics of these people? What were their personalities? What personality came out for you from yourself? What part of you came up in this relationship? So we're looking at all those in-depth things. Okay, so the second thing we want to do, of course, apart from looking at someone's schemas, so we assess their schemas, look at, and you have to understand where someone's come from. The way we get insight around what our schemas are is that we can do questionnaires. They can be helpful to some degree, but we also really have to understand our parenting, how we were raised, what we learnt, our life scripts, how we felt, what needs were met, what needs perhaps weren't met so well, and so forth. And then we look at our relationships, and then we look at the degree to which certain themes come up in our relationships, and we can backtrack to see what our schemas might be as well from that perspective. So there's lots of different information that we need to bring in to figure out what our schemas are. And it's not just about filling out a questionnaire, although the questionnaires can be useful. It is more than that though, because questionnaires can sometimes miss schemas. Okay, so we also want to know how Sophie shows up in a relationship. So we did a bit of what's called a schema mode exploration. What parts come up with her when she's meeting somebody new? When she's in the relationship, when the relationship starts to feel not so good. Usually these relationships feel great at the beginning. They're high attraction, high schema chemistry. They feel really familiar. They can often feel like, where have you been all my life? That's the marker of a high schema relationship. Where have you been all my life? And the different modes that we have can really come up, and sometimes they can be sabotaging. I've just spoken about that in a previous podcast about what mode are you dating in, so check out that one. That was a few episodes ago. Now, the biggest mode that comes up in keeping people stuck in unhealthy relationships when they have these kinds of schemas is the abandoned child mode. So it's a type of a child mode that is really rooted in core primary abandonments. And so we're not really thinking with our healthy adult mode. We're not really thinking with our head. We are doing all we can to avoid coming into contact with that abandoned feeling. And our abandoned child mode really comes to the fore, in particular with certain personalities. Personalities that are very love-bombing, that are very overt, that have strong love declarations to us, make us feel great. These kinds of personalities really make a direct play, not intentionally, for the vulnerable child, the abandoned child mode. And so once that abandoned child part of you gets that recognition or direct communication, they don't want to leave because that's everything they're looking for. That feels good. This speaks to the fact that we have to, if we have an abandonment schema, we do have to do some healing work on our abandonment schema before we're healthy enough for really a healthy love. And that's why I changed the name of this podcast to Healing for Love, because it's very broad. We're not just always talking about, I won't be always talking about romantic relationships on the podcast, but it is about how each and every one of us can do the healing work that we need to do so that we can find better connections, have better relationships, have better friendships, have better relationships with ourselves. So modes, it's very important to know what our modes are and how they show up. So we analyse this as well when working with Sophie. She happened to have a big compliant surrenderer mode. She was very people-pleasing, would silence her voice. Of course, she learnt to get love and receive love from being quite a fixer in relationships. So she was drawn to that fixer role, and she had quite sometimes she fell into this kind of like a disconnection where she just let the other person run the show. So she had a bit of a sort of a detached protector mode going on as well. So part of that work, I'm skimming over it, does involve some internal dialogues and visualizations and a lot of reparenting that my clients will learn to do to soothe their inner child, to soothe their abandoned child. Because if you don't do the work around your own reparenting of your abandoned child, you will be really more at the mercy of these kinds of relationships, and it will be very difficult to extricate yourself. So people that have big abandonment schemas can leave relationships, they can initiate leaving relationships, but it is hard, and they don't usually do that until things get pretty bad, or they're just not that interested in somebody. But if you've got high schema chemistry with someone and you've got a big abandonment schema, it's really hard to leave that, and you'll do anything to avoid leaving that. You'll shape shift and do all sorts of things to ensure that you don't come into contact with that very raw abandoned feeling. So that's that. And then the next sort of thing that we have to do that we worked through was that Sophie needed to make new commitments to herself. And this is really important because this is where you need to keep yourself accountable. And your healthy adult mode, who is the wise part of yourself, who wants what's best for you, is like the good parent part of you, had to keep her in check with this. And this is like a bit of a manifesto for yourself when you say to yourself, no, going forward, I'm actually going to commit to taking care of myself in the best possible way. This takes a lot of self-compassion, but it takes a lot of courage too. And some of these things that Sophie had to look at was, there's 3 things I've got here, is no going back to emotionally harmful relationships. All right, so there's a few deal breakers here. So if you want to move forward and you want to break these patterns, then you have to make a commitment to yourself that you don't go back. You don't go back to emotionally harmful situations or relationships. You also have to make a commitment to yourself that you do not rekindle with past partners who ghosted you, breadcrumbed you, cheated on you. They have played their hand and they have educated you in who they are. Now, I'm not saying they're bad people to the core or anything, but they're not good for you. And until they do the work, until they change their patterns, they won't be a good partner for you. And the question remains is, how many years do you want to wait for that to happen? Because not everybody makes those changes. And people need to actually put in a lot of work. You know yourself, if you're trying to break your patterns, they have to do and put in a lot of work to change relationally. We don't just change. We don't just wake up the next morning and go, you know what, I'm different. That doesn't happen. We have to put in effort. We only change if we put effort in. And particularly in this field. Sophie was particularly over things enough. She'd had enough pain and heartache in her life that she decided there was going to be no rekindling with past partners who treated her badly, who didn't show up, who were self-absorbed, who didn't do the right thing the first time, who cheated on her. She was not going back there. Because the more you go back there, two things happen. You teach yourself that nothing new is ever going to happen, and you don't discover that it can happen. So you're surrendering to what you have when you do that. And the third thing, the third kind of manifesto for her, was that she was starting to develop very clear boundaries around dating communication and availability. So she was going to be honest, she was going to be open and talk about what she actually wanted. She wasn't going to try to be somebody else. She wasn't going to try to be the person that she thought her date wanted her to be. She was just going to be her. Sure, she was going to put in effort and be the best person she could be and be a well-rounded person, but she wasn't going to be someone else she's not. And she realized what she wanted. She wanted people who were reliable. She wanted someone who would show up. She wanted someone who was dependable. She wanted someone whose actions met with their words. They did what they said they were going to do more times than not. And she decided that she wanted this consistency and she wanted this reliability. And so she was looking out for that. Okay, so there were all the clear commitments she made mentally for herself. And of course, you have to communicate that to your abandoned child. You can't just say, it's what I'm going to do. You have to make sure that all parts of yourself are on board. That can take a little bit of time. That can take a little bit more time, but it is possible. And then we need to rewrite her love template. So our template is really these sort of unspoken beliefs and assumptions that she held about love, connection, her worthiness. There's an unspoken contract. It's an unspoken expectation that we carry into relationships with us. So Sophie began to challenge the idea that she needed to be a certain way in love to receive love, so that she needed to be a fixer, she needed to be a people pleaser, she needed to be silent, not voice her needs or concerns. She relearned that all these things were learned and they could be unlearned. She wasn't born this way. She realized that the house in which she grew up with, even though loving at its foundations, was highly inconsistent and sometimes quite dysregulating. And so she was used to having a bit of emotional chaos. She was used to having to walk on eggshells, to suppressing what she really thought and felt. And she was used to being the peacekeeper and the shapeshifter. And she carried that into her own relationships. And if you have a template like that's fairly skewed to that kind of side, you'll invariably end up with more people who are self-absorbed. So I could say a lot more about that love template, but that's something that we have to explore and really unpick, right? Deconstructing the love template and figuring out, hang on a minute, this has just been all learned. This has been constructed, so let's start to deconstruct it. Okay, and just to mention again, of course, she also stopped searching for her type. Can I tell you, that's one of the biggest furphies out there. You don't have a type. That's all acculturation. That's all to do with archetypes. We've all seen too many movies of types, all right? We could go into that. Films are based on this archetype type model. We are fed a story here. People are leading us up the garden path. You have to construct your own type. So she did. She designed her own new version of healthy, emotionally available partnership and what that meant. So she was very keen to rewrite her type, as in the type of guy she was attracted to, one that didn't rely on instant, intensity in chemistry or instant intensity, but relied more on steady kindness, curiosity, and shared values. She began to see that actually she wanted a life partner, someone who was relatively stable, interested in her, who could connect with some degree of emotional availability, someone who was interesting and shared some of her values. Obviously there has to be some attraction there, but it doesn't have to be 9 out of 10 for things to grow. And so she really started to rewrite what her type might be. Maybe my type, instead of being sitting next to someone and feeling really excited or wondering what they're thinking and saying and looking at this guy and being worried about what he's thinking of me and because he's so distant and aloof, maybe my type's just someone who's just a bit more open and who can speak more easily and who we can converse more naturally with. Maybe that's my type. So she really started trying to question this. And then taking all that into dating with a whole new framework. So with all that foundation, then when Sophie was able to start dating again, and I always say to people, do it. Get out there as an experiment. Treat it as a casual job. Get out there, get back into dating. It's the only way you're going to be able to practice this stuff. Notice. You're going to start noticing who you are on this date. Who are they on the date? How do you feel with them? Is this someone you want to get to know? Is this someone you're interested in, rather than worrying about what impression you are creating so much? What are they like? How do they speak? Give them, and if you think there's could be something there, even though it's not 10 out of 10, go on a few more dates. Take it absolutely slow. So Sophie did begin dating again, slowly and intentionally. She brought her own awareness about herself and what felt good for her into each encounter. So she noticed whether there were any particular kind of red flags, and she was able to, in very big difference, she was able to walk away without over-explaining or blaming herself or saying, I'm just being too picky. Because it's not that women, I'm sure there are women out there who maybe are very picky in not a good way, but most aren't. So looking out for red flags and detecting and noticing how you feel is not being picky. It's being attuned to saying, actually, I don't really want a guy who makes a lot of jokes about women and who's really critical or did a bit of negging and laughs at my expense. Actually, that's not really being sensitive or nitpicky. I just don't want that. Most men actually don't do that. So it's okay to say, you know what, doesn't really make me feel very good. I don't feel like I want to get to know this person more. If you don't feel like you want to get to know this person more in a nice way, and that you're curious about this person and this person's got, there's something nice about this guy, I want to get to know him a little better. If you don't feel that because you think you're worried about something he said or you're worried about something he did, then that's a red flag. Okay, you notice that and you say, no. If you really want to go on a second date, go, and then just see what happens. But trust yourself, right? Because you can notice what you're experiencing. It's just that women are so good at covering that up, suppressing that, dismissing their instincts, dismissing their intuition. We've got to stop doing that, because that is one of the real kind of impediments, things that really lead us astray. Now, this is a nice part of the story, is that after really doing all this work and really being very mindful and being very diligent to assess things differently, to take her time. Eventually, it's not really that long, really. It was like a bit over a year. Sophie met somebody who she considers to be emotionally mature, open-hearted, and is consistent. Someone who's consistent, who shows up. So the relationship thus far has felt steady. She's described it as steady. More or less, I'm getting the picture that it's reciprocal and it's safe. It's not boring. It's not like you light my world 100% on fire. Look, that's nice to have it, but it never lasts anyway. And most relationships that start out like that do fizzle and burn. They do. They have crash landings awaiting. But that's fine. But if you are past that and you're thinking, no, I do want a life with somebody, and I want a life with an emotionally supportive, emotionally compatible partner, that we can be a partnership for each other and we can be there for each other and reliable, you have to look beyond the schema chemistry. So not boring, but secure. And the biggest test with her is she could finally breathe out and exhale and feel relaxed in love, like feel relaxed. Now this relationship is going pretty well. I think it's a bit over 6 months, which is pretty good. If you get over the 3-month mark and it's still going well, and you've had a disagreement and you can figure out how to reconcile these disagreements. This guy seems to be good for her and they seem to be very compatible thus far. Fingers crossed, and I hope they go really well. But it involves doing things really differently. It really does. It does involve looking and doing things differently and being a master of your own transformation, really trying to go, you know what, I'm going to do things differently now, because doing the same thing is never going to get you to a different place. And, you know, that saying, opening the same old doors doesn't lead you to a different destination. We've got to try to do things differently in order to get to a different place. So how would I describe, in summary, Sophie's transformation? Was that she moved, I guess, from a place of confusion and feeling hopeless, oh, what's the point, to really feeling a lot more confident. Like, why can't I have a relationship? Why can't I meet somebody good? Why can't this be in my future? Rather than this thinking of, oh, it's not in my future. That's your abandonment schema, emotional deprivation schema thinking, if you think that. So she also reclaimed a sense of self-agency, like herself, her boundaries, like, actually I'm a good catch here. I've got a lot to offer somebody. I've got good values, I've got good morals, I'm a good person, I care about people. Hey, I've got a lot to offer somebody here. You know, she started backing herself a little bit more as well. She started to understand how her schemas shaped her past patterns, what those patterns were, and she learnt diligently to try to interrupt those patterns and let go of the belief, of course, that she was broken and not good enough. And I guess the bigger your defectiveness schema, that's going to need some more work, right? So women who have, and men who have big defectiveness schemas, have to do a little bit more hard work in terms of tackling that therapeutically, okay? But it certainly can be done. And it is done, and Sophie did it. Then she learnt what emotional availability really does feel like. That feeling she had was very reminiscent. So her parents were loving, and they did have that good side, and her mother was very loving and warm. But she never felt like she got enough. She thought it was always going to end. It always felt a bit tenuous. It was going to end too early. She didn't know when she was going to get the next hit. That speaks to the abandonment schema. Okay, and severed kind of connection and the lack of trust of, is there someone really going to be there for me? That feeling, this is so exciting, that feeling she doesn't have with this new guy. So she actually feels like he's going to show up the next day, or he doesn't come over and spend the night and go, oh, I've got to be off now at 7 a.m. in the morning on the weekend to do something else, right? And leave her with that crushing feeling of nobody's going to be there. He's consistent. He's reliable. He is secure, and that is amazing. So it's so exciting. I'm very happy for her, and you might see yourself in this pattern as well. God knows it's a really common pattern. And this is the work that I love doing with people, mainly women, because of course, as a therapist previously for in private practice ever since 2001, and then moved more recently more into the coaching space, but I still see one-on-one clients, that it has happened. It's mainly been women who have come presented with this stuff, but I am seeing some men on and off now who are coming with similar patterns, or have been perhaps the other side of the coin in some of these relationships, and they're wanting to figure out why they've got these modes. They want connection as much as the woman. They want love and connection, but they've just learnt some of these modes that are hindering them. And so this is what this new evolution of this podcast is about. How can we all be better in relationships? How can we all show up better for ourselves in relationships and better for the other people we're coming into contact with, whether that's a romantic partner, whether that's our kids, whether that's our parents, our family, our friends, whoever. And ourselves, of course, really importantly. So also, this is the kind of work that I do with clients. We go through these similar kind of methods, and it's certainly the work that we're doing in the Love Wisely program. So I just want to make a special mention and let you know that if you are relating to this story of Sophie's and you're thinking, you know what, that is me and I want to do something different, and perhaps I'd like the support of a small group, then think about coming and joining us. We start on the 12th of June. It's not very long away. Doors are open to midnight on the 25th of May, so coming up Sunday night. Have a think about it. I'll put a link in the show notes. I've got about 4 women who have registered so far. I'm taking a maximum of 8 women because this is the founding round. And in the founding round, I want to make it very special. And I want it to be a nice, intimate group of women who have patterns, much like Sophie's, or a bit different, but they've identified a pattern and they want to just take their time going through these 12 weeks. It's a 12-week group program. It won't be pressured. It's not going to be like do all this homework and then you feel inadequate if you don't get it done. We'll be doing a lot of the stuff in the actual online calls. So it's not about making anybody feel like they're not doing it or they're not catching up. I just want it to be a lovely group experience, a real transformation. For some people, it may be just step 1. For some other women, it may be like, oh, wow, this is all falling into place now, and that's great. But I've given you a feel of how I work for people, and this is the very stuff that we'll be tackling in Love Wisely. If you miss out on this one, it's okay. There'll be other iterations. I plan on rerunning this group program, and it's going to be great. I'm so excited about it because it's something new, it's something different, and I'm just really looking forward to starting on the 12th of June. If you want to take a further look and you think, wow, this is me, I want to jump in, there'll be a link in the show notes and you can register before midnight on the 25th of May. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and mostly, I hope you've got something out of it that you're able to take away for yourself. And if you've recognized any of this stuff and you thought, oh, I can apply that, get started on that relationship review that I mentioned at the beginning and see where that takes you. Any amount of insight is a good start. Okay, so until we meet next time, good luck with all this stuff, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.